All set. We're about to call to order the governance committee. Could I have everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. About this time, I think, can I get the roll call, or do I have to make a, so we have Chairman Bergstresser set in as ex officio?
David Bergstresser.
Here.
Michael Astafan.
Excused.
Albert Hayes.
Here.
Thomas Stover.
Here.
Mike Clark.
Here.
Robert Leslie.
Here.
Robert Fulton.
Here.
John Hudson.
Here.
Carl Wright.
Here.
Richard Farrar. Here. And
Thank you,
are
Mr.
a guest.
What's that?
Mr. Fink.
I feel left out of that committee now.
If I can get a motion to adopt or revise the meeting agenda.
Also moved.
So moved. I second it.
Okay.
We're in favor?
Aye.
Approved. And if I can get the approval of the March 13th, 2012 committee meeting of the minutes.
Also moved.
So moved. I second it. Favor?
Aye.
Approved. Under committee business, under the old business, we had a discussion of the committee charters with Mr. Leslie.
At this point, there are 4 committee charters. Since the last committee meeting, I have received no comments from other staff or board members with regard to potential revisions to any of the 4 charters.
We've gone ahead with the operations committee. Is that the fourth?
The 4, yes. The 4 are audit, governance, finance, and operations.
So just like to make a, motion on that to.
Can I make a comment? Do we need the operations committee?
Do we need?
I don't
Not
think
from
so.
I don't.
Not from a,
From a public authority law
and even
standpoint. No.
even from a,
Everything that would or might occur in a discussion in the operations committee would occur also in one of the other
Yeah.
3 committees, depending on what that discussion was
right.
and the action necessary.
I'd like to make a motion that we delete the operations committee and go with the 3 mandated by the state.
Be mandated. I'll second that. You all in favor?
Aye.
No opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. So we're down to 3 committees then. Where would you place the items that were in operations among the other committees?
What would they be?
Basically, the powers of the operations committee were, the board has delegated to the operations committee the power and authority necessary to discharge its duties, including keeping the board informed of current field and engineering operations. I assume that would go to governance. Reviewing compliance with the offer of settlement in Great Sacandaga Lake and relevant reservoir operation standards at the other regulating districts' facilities. I suspect that also could go to governance.
Sure.
And monitoring and updating when appropriate the regulating district's access permit system rules, which probably
That
could
would
go to governance.
definitely go to governance.
So all 3 of those
Yeah.
devolve to governance?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say why not. Yes.
And so those basically those three purposes would then be set to, as additional purposes for the governance.
Governance, right. You need a motion for that, Mr. Leslie?
I believe we would if we're planning on moving these out of committee.
All right. You already had that motion. already on.
I'd add the motion that we take all the responsibilities of operations and place it in the governance committee.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Les. Now we have the discussion of the revised bylaws. Mr. Leslie again.
Again, the bylaws are in the same status as they were at the last governance committee meeting. In light of the two motions that just passed, I would recommend one additional change to the bylaws, which would take place at page 10, Article 6, Section 1, where it now says, or now reads, there shall be 4 standing committees, governance, finance, audit, and operations. That would be revised to say there shall be 3 standing committees, governance, finance, and audit.
Okay.
Other than that, the change you have wrought does not require any other changes to the revision proposed for the bylaws.
Okay.
Is there any other discussions?
I have none.
I don't know if it's, I got a discussion on this, but on the, I think it was on page 1 of section 3, of the change of the offices there.
Yes.
Yeah, because the office in the Black River's got a new address.
It
Basically,
does.
that would have to be changed.
We added that office back in at
Yes.
the last meeting.
I don't think,
It was prior to the last meeting that it was in the draft, the draft changes to the bylaws. However, I don't recall that do we have a physical address yet for the state office building?
You must on our lease.
Yeah, and again, because I haven't seen the final revised lease.
Well, nevertheless, that address would
I don't recall
be,
there being like a
used in the
floor
bylaws.
room number. I mean, there may have been, but we could certainly revise that as
Plug it in
whatever the
later.
address is.
Right.
I don't think we have to have it at this meeting.
that's
Okay.
something that can be put in there, I mean, yeah.
we'll
is.
leave a blank and insert it as soon as we have it.
I mean, these are some things that was, handed to me on discussion. I mean, then there's another thing on there, page 3 on section 1. To see, I'm just going by what was in the old bylaws here. And everything was,
That's page 21 of
Book.
the book.
I think there's something in there, but why take out the board? It was taken out of the old one.
Of the authority and duties of the board, section 1.
We're looking at page 1 of the board packet. There's, on page 21, there's 2 section 1s. One, Article 2 regarding the annual meeting has a section 1, and just below that, Article 3, authorities and duties of the board, also has a section 1. Which of those two are you speaking to, and what proposed
I think it was,
language change are we talking about?
I think it was a change, section 1. I think it was just the board shall be the sole policymaker for the regulating district. Why take out that?
Oh. Okay, I think what you're talking about, let me make sure we're looking at this the same. I think what you're talking about is Article 3, Authorities and Duties of the Board. Section 1 had started with a sentence that said, the board shall be the sole policymaker for the regulating district and may exercise all the powers and authorities granted but to the regulating district by Article 15, Title 21 of the Environmental Conservation Law. The change contemplated was proposed because the suggestion that the board is the sole policymaker was really designed to provide, how do you say it, I guess, the previous executive director with cover to suggest that he was not a policymaker for the purposes of the vehicle use policy. What he was trying to do, I think, was well, I'm not entirely sure what he was trying to do, but I believe that change in language was contemporaneous with the adoption or revision of the regulating district's then existing vehicle use policy. The implications are such that certain members of the senior staff who are considered policymakers for the financial disclosure requirements of the Joint Commission on Public Joint Commission on Public Ethics is what it's called now. This language in our bylaws would suggest that those staff members were not policymakers, which isn't actually accurate. Said a different way, maybe. The Ethics Commission, then the Joint Commission on Public Integrity, and now the Joint Commission on Public Ethics all have a requirement that annually certain members of state agencies and public authorities are required to file a financial disclosure form basically outlining your finances to ensure that nobody's, I think, to ensure that nobody's on the take. There's filers who are required to file as by virtue of the fact that they are threshold over, which means they make more money than a certain arbitrary number, 88 to 90 something $1,000 in the last couple of years. There's also another way to become obligated to file that financial disclosure form, and that is by virtue of being a policymaker, where, for instance, the executive director works closely with the rest of senior staff in order to formulate the agenda upon which the board acts. It's kind of difficult to suggest that that executive director is not driving policy or driving policy of the board. Also, where the board gives broad authority to staff, or especially the executive director, to do certain things, And then that executive director is supposed to use his discretion to fill out that policy or to fulfill the wishes of the board. It doesn't make a lot of sense to suggest that the executive director is not a policymaker. The language in our bylaws, therefore, really is contrary to reality. And that is the reason that it was recommended that that be pulled.
So these are just some of the suggestions that I was
That's fine.
getting into. Got a few more.
Okay.
You up for 'em?
Sure.
Let's see, I got, under article, that's what's supposed to be on page 4. So basically, it'd be page 22 in the,
Packet.
yep. And that's under the regular meetings there. It, could that be changed to 10 regular monthly meetings will be held? Dates and times to be set by the Board of Directors at the annual meeting held in January.
I don't see why you'd have to.
Yes,
These are just suggestions.
it was written to say 10 regular monthly meetings of the board shall usually be held each year. The proposed revision would have it read, except during the months of February and August, the board will typically hold one meeting per month. And you're proposing another revision to read,
10 regular monthly meetings will be held. Dates and times to be set by the Board of Directors at the annual meeting held in January.
okay. I would, as an initial comment on that language, it is directive in nature, and if we put a couple of qualifiers in there, I would be more comfortable. 10 regular monthly meetings will be held means that you have to have 10 monthly meetings. It suggests to me that neither can you hold additional meetings, so the board is basically set to 10, nor can you skip one. Which is okay if that's what the board intends to do. If, on the other hand, they come upon a stretch where there is no business to conduct or
We run the risk of no quorum?
right,
Okay.
we're unable to hold a meeting for some other reason, whether it's lack of quorum or natural disaster. Obviously,
I usually don't say anything wrong with that word.
we could do it.
How about 10 regular meetings will be scheduled?
Yeah.
Now, we held 11 meetings last year.
Yes.
Only 10 of them were regularly scheduled.
Right, there was
One
another
was-
special meeting. And then the board generally establishes a schedule in January, but that schedule is subject to change. Each board member, or each board meeting ends with a resolution setting the date and time of your next monthly meeting, which gives you a little bit greater flexibility in the event that somebody has some scheduling conflict that makes delivering a quorum difficult, much more contemporaneous in time with the actual date and time of the meeting. That meeting is set by resolution of the board. So indicating that it'll be set by the board in January. Again, I suspect we probably could change that by resolution later on in the year.
I mean, it would have to be a tentative schedule,
Yeah.
done in January.
All right.
Does this wording preclude February and August?
I don't think so.
We could have a special meeting on February or August if we
did
had
last
to.
year.
Well, not only that, if I remember correctly, at some point in the last 5 years, we had a meeting in February and didn't have one in March, and
Right.
so it was on any given year, and it was set that way in January of that year. As I recall, it only happened on one particular year.
August has typically been.
August, I agree with,
special
yes.
meeting month.
February and March had been,
Right, just flip-flop because of
Business and weather.
the, right.
All right.
So how do you guys want the language to read?
I kind of think the language is okay the way it is myself.
All right, there we
We'll
go.
typically hold 10 meetings a year. That gives us a little wiggle room. doesn't it?
All right, keep it like that, keep it like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just gotta remind you, this is only suggestions now.
Yep.
Right. That's fine.
Probably I had one more here, it's probably the last one.
Well,
So what's
Hold
going
on, hold on.
Let's get that wording.
Oh, the wording?
we've got the current language, we've got the proposal by staff, we've got the proposal by Mr. Hayes, and we've got a phrase from Mr. Stover which doesn't match directly with any of those three proposals. So,
That's a recommendation by staff.
Yeah. Is this it? The
The-
recommendation by staff?
the recommendation by staff
That is
is,
written here, yeah.
what's on page 22, Article 4, Section 1.
Right. Well, that's, I meant to say, I think that's fine.
Okay.
You want me to make a motion to that effect?
Oh, you want to discuss
Yeah,
it?
well,
You have any problem with that?
no.
Okay.
Wanna make a motion?
I make a motion that we accept the recommendation by staff and under Article 4 meetings, Section 1, pertaining to regular meetings.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay.
So we're not changing this?
Right, we're not
You
changing.
like-
Not changing.
We don't,
All in favor?
Oh, do we need a motion?
not really.
No.
No.
Okay.
If we're gonna leave it as
As it is.
I mean, the ultimate
We gotta
motion
move it
will
back
be
into-
to,
Do we need a motion if you want to change it? If you want to leave it, then it's next.
Okay.
All right,
we only need one motion.
all right, that'd be sufficient.
What's your others?
That'd be it for now.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
We don't want to discourage you.
No. You want
No,
to.
I'm not discouraged.
You want to.
Okay, I think that's what was in the recommendation adopted by the bylaws. Now we're going on to new business. New business? I think that's all we had on the discussion of the bylaws, right?
Okay.
Then we have to accept.
Unless there's any
Huh?
motion to
Accept the new
move
bylaws.
this thing as revised.
I don't know.
I don't think we had to vote on for the new bylaws right now, did we?
You could.
You could, alternatively, you could
Or
Make a
advance
leave the
motion to-
bylaws for another month.
For the recommended, for the adoption of the, for the full board, for next month?
That's fine.
Okay.
So you want to make that motion, then,
Okay.
Tom?
So you're moving them out from committee to the board
To the full board for.
To the
this
full
month
board.
or
This month or next month?
For next month.
next month? Well, you might as well leave them in committee.
Yeah, so you just want to leave it in committee?
All right, yeah.
Another month.
So then we have to have another governance committee.
Correct.
Yes.
Which means full committee.
And we're going to need one anyway, likely.
Okay,
Whatever.
Okay.
that's it?
All right. So the bylaws and committee charters are tabled for
Was this the third reading? Or
No, no.
Third time we approached the?
at least.
There's 5,
We can bring it to the full board.
Yes.
Be done with it.
December, January, February,
No, February,
March.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
It's
if
the
we talked
fifth
about
one.
that.
Okay. Yeah, so the problem is bringing it to full, it's up to you.
Yeah,
The full board will vote on it
Yeah,
and adopt it.
Want to get rid of it?
yeah.
And we-
Okay.
There weren't any more suggestions from Mike?
No,
Okay. We covered
Then-
everything here.
Then you would need a motion to
Bring it out of committee.
bring it out of committee to present it to the full board with the committee's recommendation for adoption.
Did I make a motion that we bring this out of
Committee.
the committee to the full board, and the committee recommends adoption
With the revisions.
of the, with the revision?
I have.
For the bylaws and the committee charters,
You
or
need
just?
two motions, or?
Yes,
Okay.
Okay.
I have the motions if I.
Go ahead.
I mean, I had
Yeah, go
previously, if,
Let's go.
for the bylaws, it could be motion to advance revised bylaws as,
As amended.
yeah, as amended.
Okay.
Pursuant to adoption of committee charters. Right, so we'd have to do the committee charters first.
Okay.
And that could be advance committee charters as amended to the full board and recommend adoption.
you made that motion?
I move that we advance the committee charters to the full board and recommend adoption.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's not.
Why'd you oppose something?
I'm ex officio, I just sit here and chit chat.
Now we can do the revised bylaws as amended.
Okay.
Pursuant to adoption of committee charters.
I recommend we move the revised bylaws out of committee to the full board and recommend adoption.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye?
Any opposed? It's not.
Okay.
Now moving on to new business.
Okay.
Okay, we got the discussion of the annual review and approval of investment policy. That'd be Mr. Ferrara.
There are 3 policies that the board must review annually. Those are the investment, procurement, and property guidelines policy. There will be 3 motions. And the first one for the investment policy is pursuant to Public Authority Law 2925, which basically sets forth that procedures to be followed by public authorities with respect to the adoption of investment policy needs to be in place, and this policy, as it has been annually reviewed over the years, is unchanged, and I recommend the board approve the resolution to review this policy and advance it to the full board for their review and approval.
Okay.
Make that motion.
I'll make the motion that we advance it to the full board and recommend approval of the investment policy.
I second it. Any, all in favor?
Aye?
Any opposed? Guess not.
Second policy is the procurement policy, which is pursuant to section 2879 of Public Authorities Law. And that sets forth procedures to be followed by the district with respect to the adoption of said procurement policy. It is required that it be annually reviewed, which we're doing today. And there have been no changes in the procurement policy since the last review in April of 2011, and accordingly, I also recommend that the board authorize or approve this policy and approve a motion to advance it to the full board for their review and approval.
I move that the procurement policy be moved from committee to the full board with a recommendation for approval.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Final policy is the disposition of property guidelines. This one is pursuant to Public Authority Law, Section 2896. This policy, as with the others, has been unchanged since the last review of April 2011. And accordingly, I also recommend the board advance this property guidelines policy to the full board for their review and approval.
I move that we advance the property guidelines policy from committee to the full board and recommend approval.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries. Thank you, Rick. Next, we have the discussion of the first reading of the resolution to authorize modification of front lot access permit widths. Mr. Clark.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. If you want to follow along on page 51 of the board package is the cover memo. That frames the discussion of this proposal before the governance committee. Many years ago now, at least back to 2006, and I believe it goes back further than that, there was, on a yearly basis, with an expiration date at the end of each year, a resolution made by the board, known as a resolution that acknowledged certain past practices of the access permit system. I can read you the exact title here for resolution to acknowledge certain past practices pertaining to the permit system rules. This was done as during that time of the rule making, which everyone now realizes has been essentially dead in the water since 2009.
It's in fact been withdrawn by the regulating district since 2009.
Okay.
In other words, not even in existence anymore. There's no proposal out there. The purpose of this resolution at the time was intended as a placeholder. As staff knowledge remembers and understands it, it was intended as a placeholder to acknowledge that certain non-conforming uses existed around the Great Sacandaga Lake involving many different things with the access permit system, to include configurations of access permits that would not, with today's policy and practice, not be allowed, not be left in place, and nor would they be created in the manner that they are now. Number one, first and foremost, is given the multi-generational nature of the permit system dating back to the 1930s, at a time when everybody might recall that land values and land usage was not nearly anywhere near the intensity of use that we have currently. Lots were much bigger, residents were much farther apart in general, and it was much easier to align an access permit to suit whoever was requesting one at that time. Backlot permits were created where over a portion of a width that another individual might be eligible for or would be eligible for as a front lot. And still today, you have a situation of many where you have a portion of a front lot holder's permit area that is taken up by 1, 2, 3, whatever the number of backlot permits. So they don't have their full width. That was one of the purposes of this resolution, was to acknowledge that those situations exist, and yet to correct them very difficult, if not impossible, and certainly traumatic. The other one was to acknowledge that there do exist certain non-conforming uses that while they would not be permitted today to be placed, constructed, developed, anything of the sort, they do exist, and were allowed to be there until such time as they needed repair or replacement, which would not be permitted. Nevertheless, this resolution acknowledged that it was done each year during the attempt at rulemaking. When that rulemaking concluded the rulemaking attempt concluded in 2009, that resolution was still in place and renewed on a yearly basis. January 2010, board member again moved that the same resolution, the same language as had been used in years past, with the exception of a sunset date. There was no end date for that resolution. That was moved in January 2010 and adopted by the board, effectively becoming policy for us. It's resolution 100301 by number, and that's what I bring to the committee for discussion are suggested modifications to that resolution. I would say right now up front, I'm not proposing to the committee that this resolution just be tossed out and scrapped entirely. There certainly is value in it. However, in its current form, it's extremely restrictive, and the opinion of staff is that it limits judgment on the part of staff to correct any inequities that we might otherwise be able to do, with some exceptions written into or modifications made to this resolution. Although we've been aware of this, the restrictions placed on staff by this resolution for some time, during the regular meeting, I will discuss with the board, and the permit holders that are here now at the meeting have an appeal to the board on an issue which is directly has motivated staff to bring this resolution to the committee for discussion of possible modifications. I will discuss the permit holders, and they will certainly present their case also to the board. It relates directly to this past practice resolution that's currently in existence, and the permit holders request for the board to approve their request. Drives our recommendation that the committee consider, and if the committee is willing, the full board eventually consider modifying this existing resolution. That's long-winded, but essentially, to cut to the chase, there's three exceptions that staff suggests that the committee first consider to this resolution 100301, and they are, in order: number one, modify the width or alignment. Give staff the ability to modify the width or the alignment of front lot access permit areas when affected permit holders are in agreement, and it results in an equitable solution. Allow staff to relocate backlot access permit areas from in front of front lot eligible areas when the backlot permit holder is in agreement. We have done this a couple of times over the years. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And third, relocate backlot access permit areas from in front of front lot eligible areas when such a backlot is not renewed and otherwise becomes unallocated. Nobody renews the permit. You've got the area sitting there. And this is also a practice that staff has occasionally used. It doesn't happen often, but it may happen. I mean, every year there's multiple backlot permits that are not renewed. I don't know that every year that we would relocate one of them because there's not always an area to relocate to, but nevertheless, it is a practice that we have used, and we would suggest that to the committee that the resolution should acknowledge the actual practice. If I could jump back to the first exception that I was mentioned, the ability for staff to modify the width or alignment of front lot access permit areas when all permit holders are in agreement. That's in a reasonable agreement. In other words, if someone were to argue against a realignment, their argument has to be reasonable, and that any change would result in an inequity to them. That's where the word reasonable comes into this. So I'd like to put this out. We can discuss this further. I don't know if anyone has. I know staff certainly has a collective memory of this resolution, and if the committee has questions, we're kind of on operating in a split screen here. We're going to, upon the conclusion of this governance committee meeting, go into the regular meeting, and the permit holders, the folks that are going to present their appeal to the board, when they do, and then I explain the situation on the maps, the actual, one particular example of this resolution will become much clearer to the committee and to the whole board. So it's kind of more of a timing issue. I had planned to do that during the regular meeting as far as we're presenting this proposal or recommendation to the committee. I would expect that this is something that would not likely be resolved today. I would imagine if the committee, whatever the committee's pleasure is of course the way it'll play out. But I would suggest you consider a second or third reading.
Do the permit holders have knowledge that this is in the works?
They do now.
The permit holders that have asked or presented requests to staff and particularly been denied for something that points back to this resolution, they're aware of it. The permit holders the few permit holders that follow very closely the painful attempt at rulemaking in years past are aware of this. Now that was still a relatively small cadre of individuals that were deeply involved in that attempt at rulemaking for Great Sacandaga Lake rules. But there are people that are aware of it. Is it common knowledge? I would say it's not common knowledge. When people encounter it, is when a request is made or an application made to the regulating district for something permit related that would be restricted by this resolution. So they become aware of it when they ask, more often than not.
Okay.
You mind, Mike? I since you sent this to me and I've looked it over, I'm having not trouble, but trying to understand the back lot, front lot. When you say here in the second modification, when the backlot permits are relocated,
Well, here, you know what? Let me
does
pull
that mean
this
it's
map
just-
out right now and lay it in front of the board.
move to a
'cause I
more
can point.
more convenient location for them? Or?
There's a map down there too. I'm
Go ahead. Just so I know. I'm not familiar with the permit
Mr.
system.
Hayes are familiar with it.
I know these guys are, yeah. Go ahead.
In this particular case, you have
Right.
these are areas of private property, here's Bunker Hill Road.
Sure.
I've got the map. This is the map we've got with us.
Okay.
This is Bunker Hill Road. Great Sacandaga Lake's out here.
Mm-hmm.
This line here is the shoreline.
Okay.
And I'll get into this again in a couple of minutes when we're in the regular meeting, but
Yeah.
this property line here is the New York State property line. These private property holders, their private parcel bounds on New York State property, which of course extends all the way out into the lake and under the lake, as a matter of fact. That makes these individuals front lot eligible,
Okay.
because eligibility is based primarily on does their private property directly bound on
Right.
New York State property line. There are many more people around, essentially 1,900, give or take, different parcels around Great Sacandaga that don't bound directly on
State
the
line.
state property line, but are within a mile of a given area that has backlot permits. And when I say backlot permit, today they're issued in a 10-foot width. We're not creating new areas. We're not, so the number is essentially hovering around 1,900.
Okay.
In many cases, they're on the other side of the road or further back where they can see the lake, but they don't, between their private property and the state land is another piece of private property. So they don't have the eligibility
Okay.
for a front lot access permit, but the practice of the regulating district has been to make them eligible and eligible to apply for a backlot access permit if one is available.
And it spans a mile?
Well, in practice, there are people, if they're within a mile of that particular area, then, so yes, so they may have, there are many people that have an access permit that's not right out their front window that they're looking at. It's down the road.
Sure. But it gives them lake access.
It gives them lake access. They can have a dock if they so choose. Now, just and I will come back to this later on, but this private parcel right here are the Santucci's.
Right.
This private parcel over here is the Laubensteins. Just so you can kind of you can get an idea. They don't currently have the Santucci's do not currently have a
Because of
a
the
front lot access permit.
geography of the lake and.
Well, and that is
And
one of the
line.
difficult
Okay.
things that
Okay.
occurs. It's one of the reasons that drives the need for staff to have a little flexibility is this,
I don't
the
know.
nature of all Adirondack lakes, man-made or not,
Right.
is that you very rarely have a linear section of shoreline where where the access permits are just perpendicular to the shoreline and things are nice and simple and clean. Many years ago, when, again, there's multi-generations, it's a multi-generational situation where in the 30s and 40s and 50s, when people started getting access permits, and at that time, really front lot permits, because if they were buying land for the first time, there was more of that land available that bounded right on the property line. The alignment didn't matter so much if your neighbor wasn't that close to you, and everybody still had reasonable access to the shoreline. But as those gaps as lots were subdivided, as undeveloped property parcels were developed, and houses began to fill in those spaces in between the older houses, and many times the alignment of those access permits, we're almost committed to carrying those lines down in a parallel fashion, and you're almost, without the ability to change those, you're stuck with the alignment. When you get into a cove area in particular, and that's what we're looking at here, it creates difficulties. Not everybody physically, if you stick with those alignments, gets their fair share.
Right. Well, figure out a way to straighten it out.
And I will say there's not always an equitable solution
Right.
to some of these problems. Some of it's just the lay of the land and the alignment of other people's access permits. And but there are cases where there are solutions that exist, potential solutions, for staff to make a change that's equitable to, reasonably equitable to all the permit holders in that area. A modification, we feel that a modification to that resolution
Right.
is warranted.
No problem. I know I stared at this for quite a while.
When we, when we get into the discussion of this.
Sure.
I'm sure we'll have probably one or more in the general meeting and beyond. You probably can't do it today, but if we could blow this up maybe and put it on the screen where the folks in the audience can see it.
Well, we can put it on the screen. I'm pretty sure that I don't know about Brad, but okay. Well, the rest of the folks are intimately familiar with this.
Okay.
With this map over here. But yeah, we can put it on the screen.
Well, I'm just wondering how many people we have.
For that matter, I'd be more than happy to. I'll toss it out now, even though it's not exactly the right time. I'd be more than happy to take any of the board members that right to the spot, so they can a map of these cove areas with the property lines and the permit areas. There's a lot of lines going in every which direction possible. Unless you're used to looking at it, it's not always the clearest thing going. That map right there doesn't show how some areas are nice and high and dry, and others are a jumbled mix of alders and low and wet. And so again, I would be happy to take board members, myself, and I would assume also I'm sure also the Hudson River Area Administrator would be more than happy to give a little field explanation of what's actually going on here.
Okay,
We'll do that in a regular meeting.
very good.
Thanks.
We're going to discuss that in the next, at the meeting.
Yes, we're going to table that for now. We need a motion on that?
We do not.
No, okay. We'll consider it next meeting, next government's committee. Get my teeth straight. Thank
Keep
you.
it committee. Then we'll listen to this.
So I guess that would be on that. If there's any other business, either the governance committee.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Well, I move that we adjourn the committee meeting for this month.
Second. All in favor?
Aye?
Any opposed? I hear none. Meeting adjourned.